When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
This is The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic. When I was a sophomore in high school, I joined the track team. I was optimistic that I would be naturally good at running, and I jumped right into daily training despite never really running much before. I quit the team right after our very first meet. Part of the reason was because I came in dead last and my fragile 15-year-old ego couldn't take it. The other reason was shin splints. My shins hurt so much that walking was painful, let alone running. The good news is that my shins and my ego healed, and I never got shin splints again, even when training for marathons as an adult. But I came to find out later that shin splints are one of the most common running injuries you can get, and it's also preventable. Let's learn more. Welcome to The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and my mission is to help you improve your running, your mindset, and your life with science-backed training and plant-based nutrition. Today's conversation is all about shin splints with physical therapist and run coach Duane Scotti. We'll discuss how and why runners get shin splints, as well as who's most susceptible, how to treat them if you get them, and how to get back to running safely and never worry about them again. If you've ever had this injury before, or if you'd like to prevent getting it, this is the episode for you. This is also a great time to remind you to share this one with a running buddy who's going through this right now. And of course, don't forget to stay tuned all the way to the end of the conversation for another Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. And now, my conversation with Duane Scotti. Welcome back to The Planted Runner, Duane.
Yeah, Claire, so good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so today we are going to dive in deep on a very common runner's injury, shin splints. So if the people listening haven't ever experienced them, can you describe what they are?
Yeah, this is very common, especially in kind of newer runners or people getting back into running later in life after a long time away from running. But it's kind of this achy, dull pain on, their shin bone area. And the most common spot or location is kind of on the inside part of the shin bone. But you do have some that feel kind of like a tightness feeling more to like the front and outside part of the shin. And this usually will happen when we start increasing miles or, we start running too fast, and it can really leave a lot of runners frustrated where they, just have to like cut their run short, stop running, or they take a couple days off and, they're like, okay, my shins feel better. Let me try to go for a run. And then their pain comes back, and it just leaves them feeling very frustrated and always having to like worry about their shins.
So what's going on there? What is it really the bone? What's happening inside your leg there?
Yeah, great question. The classic or the traditional shin splints is actually called medial tibial stress syndrome, which is actually the connection of the muscles as they connect into the bone. So it's really an irritation or overload of that connective tissue, just from simply essentially doing a little too much, too fast, too soon. And, that's where this kind of classic kind of quote unquote overuse injury comes from. So it's more this like soft tissue connection into the outer layer of the bone.
So is it too fast, too much? Like, what is really the trigger here?
Yeah, all the above. So it is just a matter of doing too much too soon for what our bodies can handle at that given point in time. And I say that because there is this misconception. I felt this way in my 20s. Anytime I tried to run on the treadmill, as I was kind of the gym rat and would kind of run on the treadmill for cardio, to try to get lean. And my shins would always kill me. So I was just like, well, I guess I don't have a runner's body. I'm not meant to be a runner. And, luckily at age 31, after I had hip surgery and I actually wanted to get back in shape, I started taking up running and, have since then, 14 years later, here I am, still running, doing what I love. So it is this, misconception that we think that we can't be able to run because of the shin pain that we're having, but it's really that we're not actually allowing our bodies to adapt to the demands of running for where we are at that given point in time. So for some, it's running too fast and they're just literally running, faster than their easy zone initially, and their tissues are getting overloaded. The faster that we run, the more that those muscles contract, the more load, stress to that area. And then others, it's, they're doing too much load in weekly volume, miles. Maybe they're doing their first marathon training cycle, their longest long runs they've ever done before. So it could be a combination of any of those. And I just want to say this kind of off the bat, because I know there are going to be many that, are listening to this and they might think, well, maybe I can't run that half marathon. Maybe I can't run that marathon. It's where your body is right now. Luckily, you can train kind of the right way and build up running in a smart way, but then also strengthen your body so it can tolerate the demands that running has to offer.
Okay. So what if you do too much too soon? Your shins hurt. What should you do? I mean, a lot of people will do just what you said, take a couple of days off, get back into it. Their shins still hurt. And then you get the other runners who are like, it's no big deal. I'm just going to run through it. What is the prescription for treatment?
So it really depends if it is you painted the picture of more of this like acute phase where let's just say someone's, shin started hurting for a couple of days. That's where, yes, we go into this kind of acute phase management where we actually use the acronym PEACE, or I subscribe to more of this newer kind of mindset in kind of PEACE versus the old acronym of rest, ice, compression, elevation, the RICE phenomenon, where we're really looking at PEACE, like P is protection. So we're really avoiding activities and movements that actually increase any pain during this initial time period. So that would be like not doing the same exact run that you just did. Elevation, that might pertain to this injury, not so much, but avoiding actually anti-inflammatories might be a good thing, especially for this injury. I don't find it that helpful in the initial stages because it's actually avoiding any healing from occurring. And then compression socks can be useful for this particular injury. And then just really educating and knowing that the body, knows what's best. And we just want to avoid relying on passive strategies, such as just relying on massage or this tool is going to fix my shin splints. And really the activity modification aspect is kind of what we had talked about. So that is more of this acute management. And then it looks totally different for someone who's been battling this, for months, right, for weeks, or comes back every training cycle, every time they try to run, a half marathon or a marathon.
So you said, I want to get back to no painkillers. So no ibuprofen, no Tylenol. We should just, grit our teeth and bear it.
Yeah. So not so much. So the NSAIDs or the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, a lot of people use to kind of decrease inflammation. And for this injury, it's not usually inflammation that's the issue. So I don't think it's going to be that helpful. If someone did have a lot of pain with just walking around and let's say they needed to be on their feet all day long, then I certainly say, a little bit of Tylenol would help take the edge off, if you will, or ice would help take the edge off. just from like a local pain management standpoint. But ice isn't going to heal your shins. And you'll see
Right.
many people put ice on their shins after every run. But that's not going to actually fix the problem.
Right. And in fact, it could slow down your healing, right?
It could, because it could prevent your tissues from actually adapting and going to kind of the next phase of healing, especially if it is more chronic and you've been battling shin pain for quite some time.
Okay. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about chronic shin splints. What are you supposed to do? So let's say jogging is okay, but anything faster than a very easy run, you feel the pain. What should you do?
Well, if you're feeling the pain with every run, that is, so you're saying more so easy runs are fine?
You can go for a jog and things are okay, but when you start to, do a speed day or maybe even go on a really long run, that's when you start feeling it. But your normal everyday, whatever it is, 3-mile jog is okay.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. And I guess I'll give kind of like using the acronym kind of overarching philosophy is we really want to like, first we said acute was like peace. This is all about love, and love stands for the L is load. So this is where we need to actually strengthen the tissues and we need to add load. So actually not stop running. So we're going to do some type of modified running, whatever that is. And depending upon your pain levels, that could look like maybe we're adding in some walk breaks in there to allow the tissues to adapt and actually load. But then also that is going to help stimulate the collagen formation that aids in healing. So this like loading is important. So we do that through running. We do that through specific exercises that are going to help load those tissues. And then the O in love is optimism, that the condition, like especially this one, honestly, shin splints there is no surgery for shin splints. Like there is no next step, like shin splints will get better. And, if you are starting out in your running journey, this is the most common injury you're going to have as a newer runner. And there are many experienced runners who never have to even think about their shins. Right. Because like they know that this gets better, right? If you kind of do some of the strategies we're talking about here, the V stands for vascularization. So we want to make sure that we are improving blood flow in the area. So let's just say your shin pain was like an 8 out of 10 pain. You're like, all right, Claire and Duane were like, I have to go for a run. No, like if it's an 8 out of 10 pain, you're not going for a run, but maybe you're going to choose the bike and you're going to do some cross training. We're going to increase blood flow in the area. You're not just going to sit on your couch and do nothing for days, weeks, months to allow your shins to heal, right? So we need vascularization. That's going to be helpful. And then definitely exercise. And when we look at this, we really look at what are the root causes to why you have shin pain to begin with. Is it a mobility issue in your ankles? Is it a strength issue in your lower leg muscles, in your hip muscles? Is it, proprioception and you just don't have good single leg stability? And when we're running, we're always on one leg. So we need good single leg stability.
So how can you tell which one it is?
Yeah, so that's, I would recommend, especially if you've been battling this for a while, that you see a good healthcare professional who works with a lot of runners and can do some simple tests to really identify like what your specific root causes are. That being said, I do have a couple like low hanging fruit things that I found as patterns in kind of in my clinical practice and then working with runners, how I work with them now is, definitely strengthening the specific muscles in your lower leg are going to be a game changer. And just adding the proper loads and allowing them to adapt is going to be helpful for when you go to run.
What are some of your favorite strength training exercises for the shins?
Yeah. So for the shin, so I have like a series of 6 exercises that I like to give my runners that really focus on building up the strength and resilience of the front muscles, the inside muscles. So posterior tibialis muscle and tendon a lot of times and can mimic kind of traditional shin splints or medial tibial stress syndrome. Or I see like a little combo platter of both of those conditions. So that's a really important one and one that a lot of runners aren't doing and then progressing to like a standing position, which definitely looks a lot different than, if you've ever kind of went to maybe PT before and saw your standard, kind of everyday PT who gave you a couple of TheraBand exercises like on the table. These exercises are different, where they're going to actually stimulate your muscles with your foot on the ground. I have a good one that really allows for posterior tibial activation with a calf raise, which is important because both of those muscles function together when we push off during running. So those are kind of have that like series on my YouTube channel.
Can you walk us through? Because I'm not really following exactly what you're talking about. So I sit on a table with a band, and what do I do?
All right. So let's go through the 6 exercises. So let's start with, let's go with kind of ankle eversion first, right? Like this one, you could take a mini band, like one of those loop bands, put it around like the ball of your feet, and you're going to kind of bring your foot out to the side and then slowly bring it back. That's going to isolate like eversion or strengthening your peroneal muscles. The one that I was talking about to isolate the posterior tibialis muscle and tendon is the best way to do this one that I really like is kind of crossing the leg over in a sitting position.
Okay.
So if you took that loop band, or you might need to use, depending upon your strength, a regular TheraBand, let's say like a single, loop it around the ball of your foot. And for this one, you're going to now bring your foot and ankle up to the ceiling and then slowly lower it down. So your legs kind of like crossed over in like a figure 4 position. So that would kind of isolate the posterior tibial tendon. And then if we go to looking at the anterior tibialis, you can do like toe raises, which a lot of people might be familiar with, or might have done like heel walking before, where your toes are up.
Right.
I like to do this with the heels elevated on like a lower step, or like if you took a textbook and you just had your heels elevated on a textbook, and then you work on raising your toes up to the ceiling, hold for a second or two, and then down slowly. The down slowly part is very important for us runners because most of these muscles are functioning while they're lengthening when we run, meaning they're working eccentrically, or they're like slowing down the rate at which our foot hits the ground, and we kind of flatten in mid stance and pronate, and then we wind up supinating and pushing off of like a nice, stable, rigid foot. So the focusing on training them with the slow lowering is important. And many people kind of common errors with these exercises, they do them too fast, or they just like let the foot kind of flop down. So you want to make sure that you are getting that control. So that was kind of the third exercise. Another one for the anterior tibialis that's real easy is either in a standing position now, putting your foot in a loop band and doing like standing marching.
Okay.
Or putting your foot inside of a light kettlebell, not the 40-pound kettlebell, maybe a 5 or 10 pounder. And the nice thing about that too is we're doing like resisted hip flexion. So you're strengthening your hip flexors as well as the anterior tibialis, because your foot has to actually stay elevated to keep it inside the kettlebell or keep it inside the band. And then I also mentioned before we get to the calf raise, I really like integrating those outside shin muscles, the peroneal muscles. That was like the first exercise I mentioned, with sidestepping. So like people have probably seen like a crab walk, or working your side hip muscles, your abductors, which are extremely important for us as runners. So I like to integrate that with putting the loop band down at the feet, at the ball of the toes. So when you're stepping out to the side, you actually have to push your ankle outward as well. So you get a little like 2-for-1 special, a little BOGO, hit the peroneals, get the glute med turned on. And then the last one is really taking a small ball. You can use a lacrosse ball. I like to use like a little mobility ball that you'd like release your foot with, and put that in between your heels, and standing position, holding on lightly for light balance. So that's not an issue. And pushing your heels in to the ball is going to give you that inversion. So that's going to work the posterior tibial muscle. And then you're going to rise up on the ball of your toes doing a calf raise. So you're working your calf strengthening, gastroc soleus muscles, but you're integrating that with the foot stability that we need as runners.
After a short break, I'll be back with more of my conversation with Duane Scotti. The Planted Runner is sponsored by Liquid IV. Instead of making New Year's resolutions, I like to focus on process goals, the little rituals that soon become habits. One of mine this year is making sure I'm hydrated before, during, and after every run. One of my favorite ways to hydrate is with Liquid IV. My current favorite flavor is pina colada, which also, by the way, makes a great mocktail any time of year. In each packet, you get 8 vitamins and nutrients, 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, and no artificial sweeteners. And it's non-GMO and, of course, vegan. Make Liquid IV your new ritual this year. Just one stick with 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code PLANTED at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code PLANTED at liquidiv.com.
There is no hood like parenthood. When you meet a fellow parent, you just kind of get each other on a whole nother level. Hi, I'm Kanika Chadda Gupta. I'm a former CNN journalist, mom of 3, including twins, and host of That's Total Mom Sense, the podcast. I interview change makers on their life lessons, legacy, and superpower of intuition, aka their mom sense and dad sense. I've had some pretty amazing parents on my show.
Hey, what's up? I'm Kelly Rowland.
Hi, this is Chelsea Clinton. It's me, Bobby Brown. Can't wait to share my story.
Episodes release every Thursday. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Join my tribe at that'stotalmomsense.com and follow me on Instagram at Kanika Chadda Gupta. I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you.
And we're back with more of my conversation with Duane Scotti. Everything that you've explained, I know that 99% of runners are not doing any of that, right? Right? So how come runners who have a little more experience, how come we're not getting shin splints? I mean, I got shin splints in high school when I was on track, but I've never gotten them as an adult. And I've never done anything that you've just said.
Yeah. So the reason that won't necessarily help prevent them per se. That's definitely going to help treat them. And if you've had them chronically, but most likely us runners, we kind of learn from our mistakes, right? And when we run too much or we run too fast and we start feeling, it might not have been shin splints in your case, or it might have been someone started having some IT band issues. Right. And you started to learn and train smarter. You probably did more research, education, listen to podcasts like this one. And, you started to train the right way that really balances recovery with training and harder running. So that's why us experienced runners usually don't get these, because we're not overloading our bodies in a way that the shins can't tolerate. And as us masters runners in our 40s and beyond, it's usually the tendons that are like the first line of defense that will usually get cranky if we do jump over that border of kind of a little too much than what we're really ready for. So it's usually not the actual shin bone.
Okay. So besides the too much too soon situation, are there certain people that are just more susceptible to it? Is it something to do with genetics or form or anything like that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So I mentioned kind of newer runners, and newer runners are usually not as efficient when they start out in their running journeys. And, running form is definitely one thing that I see a lot with newer runners is they do tend to strike the ground with their heel all the way out in front of them, which isn't as much of an issue. It could be I've seen some huge heel strikers where their toe is, almost like a whole foot off the ground when their heel strikes the ground. But it's the fact that their foot and ankle is out in front of their center of mass, and it's out in front of the knee when the foot lands. So when the foot lands, we get these ground reaction forces that come back up through our shin. And if they're overstriding a lot with their running gait cycle, then that's going to put increased forces and demands to those soft tissue structures in the shin. So that's a big one. That's probably the most common one.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done research on this where they've, looked at those with higher cadence and lower cadence. So definitely lower cadence folks have an increased incidence of shin pain.
So fewer steps per minute is cadence,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So fewer steps per minute, they're a little bit slower. So if you just increase your turnover time and your cadence a little bit, a lot of times that can even make a dramatic difference in your shin pain, because usually those that are overstriding, that will, not all the time, but that may decrease the likelihood that you wind up overstriding, because now you are increasing your step rate.
And how do you recommend people actually do that? Because it's very hard to kind of change the way you run while you are running, because you can think, oh, I need to up my cadence, or, oh, I shouldn't overstride. And then I really shouldn't do that. And then what's for dinner? And what am I going to wear tonight? And, we forget as we're running if we're out there for a long time. So how do you recommend people go about altering the way they run?
Yeah, so that's a great point that you bring up. So I always do like a full running gait analysis when I work with my athletes, and I'll pick up on, every little thing kind of, right? Like, let's say the majority of folks will have like 3 or 4 things that pop out, but I'm always going to only focus on one, because our brains can only focus on one thing if it is something that needs correcting, right? So if it correlates to kind of someone's chronic shin splints, let's say, and yes, we want to increase your cadence, then that's the one thing you're focusing on, number one, I guess, with gait retraining. And then number 2 is I usually, tell my athletes with their device that they have, most of them now do track cadence. And I just tell them that I do want to just check in, like on one of your screens, like on my Garmin, I put on my custom screen, one of the variables I look at is cadence, where I'm just checking in on an easy run, because for those that are doing speed work, they're doing faster running, it's usually not an issue, because normally when we run faster, our cadence increases anyway.
Right.
But it's more of the easy run, the slow run, and people get into this like slow and sloppy form during their easy runs. So I always just tell them to check in every now and again, look at their watch, and just say, let's try to at least get in the 160s. So like, no, everyone doesn't need to be in the 180s. As long as you are in shooting for mid 160s, then I'm good with that. And it also depends upon your height as well with cadence. But the cue that I usually give my athletes is, I just want you to think of taking either shorter, quicker steps, or kind of leading with your knee, like knee drive. So as you bring your leg forward, think leading with the knee. And it's not like something ridiculous, like you're doing like a big march, but just thinking about leading with the knee as opposed to leading with your foot a lot of times will help the foot land under the knee.
Mm-hmm. Good. So what is the prognosis for somebody who's got sort of a mild to moderate case of shin splints? How long is this going to take to heal? I know everybody's different, but can you give us like a kind of general idea?
Yeah, so it is, it's that depends question. And it depends if you are just doing some of those strategies we talked about of just putting like Band-Aids on it versus actually getting down to the root causes. And, we talked about strengthening the shin muscles, but I'd be remiss to not mention strengthening the hip muscles, because a lot of our hip muscles actually help decrease stresses down lower into the shin muscles. Especially the muscles on the side of our hips and in our deep butt, our hip rotators. So if we really focus on activating and strengthening your hip muscles, then that's going to decrease the stresses that are down at the shins, and you're not going to collapse as more when you run. So what
are some of your favorite exercises for that?
Yeah. So
classic squats, deadlifts, that kind of thing.
I always like to start out by kind of restoring fundamental running movement patterns. And there are a lot of adult runners that don't really know how to turn on certain muscles because they've been injured for a while. They haven't been running. Maybe they haven't been exercising. They started running during the pandemic, and now they're just like running for exercise, and they're not really training in order to run. So I do like to kind of take it down a notch and make sure that they can feel those muscles working and they know what it feels like. So, a classic exercise, which actually has a lot of evidence behind it in terms of like muscle activation, is like the classic fire hydrant that I'm sure you're kind of familiar with on your hands and knees. And doing that isometrically with a mini band around your knees has been shown to actually have like the greatest activation of the glute max, more so than like a clamshell or a side lift or a bridge or any of those exercises. And I actually learned that only a year ago and started implementing that myself. And then with a lot of runners, it's just like, hey, let's turn it on. And then you can go to progressions that you mentioned. So I always like to start with kind of those activation exercises, like let's turn them on. So whether we're doing the fire hydrant or a clamshell could be a good one to make sure someone knows how to open up their hip and not use, let's say, like the front of the hip muscles, like the TFL that connects to the IT band is usually a common compensation that they're not using their deep hip rotators. So those are always good to like feel the muscle, but then we have to actually strengthen those areas when the foot's on the ground because that's what we're doing when we're running. So there are a lot of different progressions from that point.
So do you recommend that we do some of these activation exercises right before we run or just incorporate them into our strength training sessions or both?
Yeah, so it depends upon the person, and time-wise, all of those variables, but it can be a nice, like we need to be doing some type of activation before it runs, like hands down, like we can't just go out the door and run anymore, especially if you are in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. Our bodies, like in our 20s, could do that in our teens, but usually most of us can't do that. So you have to do some type of 5-minute dynamic warm-up. We're activating muscles, we're getting mobility going. If you use some of these during that, then yes. But for others, if they've never done strength training before, this might be their strength training, right? They might have a session, a 20-minute session of, yes, let's turn these muscles on. Let's, strengthen, like run specific muscles. And that's their strength training. There are going to be others who are more advanced with strength training and they're doing deadlifts and squats and lunges and all, kind of quote unquote advanced exercises. Then they might do a series of exercises for 5 or 10 minutes to, yes, like let's get these deep hip stabilizers turned on. Like I did that yesterday before I did my deadlifts in the gym. I was doing some exercise with band and really making sure everything was fired on all cylinders before I actually like loaded up the barbell. So yeah, it really does depend. Sorry, that's the answer we all hate, does it?
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, I think that's actually, it depends thing is actually a little freeing because you can make things tailored to you. You don't always have to do the same thing as every other runner is doing.
Yes.
So let's talk about the mental side of it because that's a big deal to us runners. So let's say I got shin splints and I have a half marathon coming up and I can't run. Like, what do you suggest? Let's say it's in 2 months. Give me some advice on how to get through the kind of down period where, right now I feel like my dreams are dashed.
Yeah, I know. This is one of those things that's always like, I hate runners having to feel like they can't do something. And there's 2 ways to go about this. Like you'll get some runners that just push through and say half marathons training's hard and it should be painful and I'm going to push through and ignore the pain. I would say that is not a good option because chronic shin splints, like we mentioned, there's no like surgery for this, but chronic shin splints will eventually, because we talked about the connection to the outer layer of the bone, that the stress goes to the actual bone itself. And it does turn into, if you have chronic shin splints and you're literally not treating it and you're keeping to kind of like do the training that you're doing, will lead to a bone stress injury. And you will eventually get like a stress fracture of the tibia bone, which you don't want because that is 6 to 8 weeks of literally you're not running, you're not doing the thing you love. So you want to avoid that at all costs. But the majority of runners who have shin splints, as long as you modify that activity level, and if you are 2 months out from your half marathon, if you just started getting pain, like your prognosis is great. Honestly, if you modify and you do some tailored exercises for this problem. And you should be able to literally just modify your running, not even have to stop running unless, again, in the rare situation, your pain's an 8, a 9 out of 10 pain, which it rarely is. You can modify your training for that week or two and then actually resume and pick back up, because now you're going to keep those tools in your toolbox that you started to strengthen those areas and work on those problem areas and maybe run a little smarter. Maybe you were running outside of your zones. You weren't listening to Claire that you should be kind of in your easy effort zone for those runs, because you were like, I got a goal of getting right, like sub 2 hours in the half marathon maybe, and I need to run my long run at the pace I'm going to be doing my half marathon race at. Right.
No.
So, right.
Yeah.
That was my silent, like, eye roll there that everyone's not going to get. But, right, like, you're going to train smarter, and this pain honestly could be resolved in a couple of weeks. If you've had it chronically, then it is going to take, weeks and months. But with the right strategies, what you're going to see is your shin pain doesn't start until later into the run. Right.
Okay.
So it's not going to start like right when you start running or a mile into your run. You're going to be like, wow, I could run like 3 to 4 miles now. My shins didn't even hurt. You know what? They started aching a little bit toward the end. And as you kind of move along, that pain's going to be less intense. It's going to be less frequent during your runs, and it's not going to last after the runs. Right. So like there's going to be progress. Like this is going to heal. And I think that's important from the mindset standpoint that you mentioned.
Yeah. So what is an acceptable pain level? Because we get a couple kinds of runners. We get some runners who say, oh, my shins hurt, I'm going to take 2 weeks off. And then we get the other runners that are like, oh, my shins hurt, I'm going to run, and I'm going to go ahead and run even if it's about a 5 out of 10. So there's the people who say, I'm not going to run unless I'm 100% pain-free. And then there's the other ones that are like, pushing it. So where is it acceptable? Number one, do we have to wait till we're 100% pain-free to run, or should we stop once we feel pain? Or what is your guideline for running through an acceptable amount of pain that won't aggravate the injury?
Great question. And I kind of subscribe to kind of just simple, kind of like red is no, we're not running. Green, yes, we're running. And yellow is going to be, we're running with caution, and we're making sure that we're monitoring, how it's going in there. And then pain level wise is obviously subjective. So everyone's pain, tolerance is different and how they rate pain. But generally speaking, if you're in the 7 to 10 out of range pain wise, then you are in the red, right? Like that is high pain levels. And you probably, honestly, even if it's shin pain for a day or two, you shouldn't be running. Usually it's not going to be longer than that. And again, if it is that high, then, and I'd also be remiss to say this, we do want to make sure that you have ruled out stress fractures, because that is a red flag item. And that is a little different than shin splints. Like I think the first question you might have asked is, and we talked about like achy pain, either on the inside part of your shins or the outside part of your shin. A stress fracture is going to be very localized, pinpoint specific. You're going to usually be able to like point right to the area. It's going to be more sharp. It's going to be like during the whole run, you're feeling it. And it's going to give you night pain. So that's kind of like a classic feature. Just in case someone's listening to this and they're having that, like you want to go to a medical professional and make sure you've ruled out a stress fracture. So shin splints usually isn't going to cause that severe pain, right? So it is usually going to be in, this 1 to 3 range, which is the green zone. Honestly, you can run easily. Like that's totally safe. And then if you're in the 4 to 6 zone, then that's like yellow. You're proceeding with caution. And most of the times you can actually run. You might need to modify. Let's say you ran, you're doing a 5-day week plan. Maybe we drop it down to 4 days, or maybe even 3 for the first week. The next week, as your symptoms are getting better, then we go back up to 4, and then you go back up to 5 eventually. Or if you're doing speed work, right, we take off, we hold speed work for that week, and then we kind of reintroduce. So Does that answer your question in terms of?
Yeah, for sure. It's, what I usually tell runners is if it's above a 3 out of 10, it increases as you run, or if it becomes sharp, that's the sign that says, yep, red flag, time to pull it back. So maybe I'm a little bit more conservative than you are, but I think if running is making it worse, that is a sign,
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's very good advice. And I think the thing, I guess I'll just add to that is if someone is feeling 2 or 3 with walking their dog for 10 to 20 minutes, and then they don't think they're ready for running, right? I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case, because I do see a lot of people that are taking too long of a period off of running, right? Or when they ran, they felt a 4 or a 5, but it wasn't like the whole time. And after their run, and that's another great question for you, like ask your athletes is like, after the run, how long did the pain last for, right? If it lasts over an hour, then you're like, okay, maybe that was a little too much. But if they're like, yeah, I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes, I like took a shower or whatever, and then I didn't really notice it, then like that's actually in the safe zone. So that's telling you that, that running that they did on that day wasn't making the condition worse at all. So it's another like great question to ask them after the run. Yeah.
So it kind of sounds, though, with shin splints, maybe not so much with some of the other common running injuries, but about this one in particular, there definitely is some hope if you get it, right?
Definitely. Yes. There's a lot of hope and optimism, honestly, because even like we were just talking about training, and as like a running PT and coach, honestly, even when I was in kind of a traditional clinic, like I can help runners a lot more with my knowledge from the coaching background now than I ever could as just a physical therapist in the clinic, actually like get over shin pain and get back to running, because a lot of it is training and like the proper training and modifications. So there are a lot of runners, like if you are currently working with a coach, like working with that coach closely, like they can honestly help you with your shin pain, probably more so than most of your traditional medical practitioners out there, because it is all about the activity modification and then the run plan. And yes, this will get better.
Yeah. That's good to know. So I think that's a perfect place to kind of wrap this up. So you said you had some YouTube videos. We can put the links to those in our show notes, but where can people find you, Duane?
Yeah. So you mentioned YouTube. So I do have a Spark Healthy Runner YouTube channel. SparkHealthyRunner.com is kind of home base. And if you like this podcast, we also have the Healthy Runner podcast, which kind of shares information about, keeping runners kind of healthy, getting them stronger, running faster, and enjoying lifelong injury-free running. And all of like the YouTube videos I mentioned in today's, session here, I also have compiled that into like the most common questions people have about shin splints into kind of the ultimate guide download. So I can share that link with your listeners as well.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for answering our questions and providing a little hope about shin splints.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Claire. It was great seeing you.
And now it's time for the Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. Today's topic is fitness is hygiene. Do you need to work up motivation to brush your teeth every day? I hope not. You just do it, and if you were to skip it, you'd just feel off. You wouldn't beat yourself up for missing a brushing, you'd just go ahead and do it. Your fitness should be the same way. You don't need motivation to run or lift or do your mobility. You simply make time for it in your day and you get it done no matter how you're feeling, just like brushing your teeth. When you stop looking for motivation and you simply think of your fitness as essential hygiene, you simply become a more fit person. No motivation required. Thank you for listening to The Planted Runner, part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. If you enjoyed this episode, the very best way to keep it going is completely free, and it takes 5 minutes. Just write an Apple Podcast review. Tell me and the world what you think, and you'll help boost this show's reach more than you can imagine. I read every single one, and I am immensely grateful to have your support. Have a great run today.
Hear Her Sports is a podcast for everyone who loves stories by and about women striving to improve and make a difference in their lives. I am your host, Elizabeth Emery, a former professional cyclist. In every episode, I introduce a female athlete or woman in the business of sport through a thoughtful conversation about who they are and the terrific work they're doing. My guests and I explore the glorious and frustrating issues in sports, history, equity, training, nutrition, and so much more. Join us for inspiration, for community, and for love of being a strong, athletic woman.